This is the Dallas Morning News.
Eat, Drink, DFW from the Dallas Morning News is made possible by Central Market.
Hi, and welcome to Eat, Drink, DFW, the podcast from the Dallas Morning News food team. Each week, we take a look at the food and drink trends in North Texas, talk about restaurants in Dallas-Fort Worth, learn some new recipes, and sometimes even get tips from you, our listeners. I'm Anna Butler, the Dallas Morning News' food and events editor. This week, we're talking about COVID-19, on what changed, what closed, the indelible mark left on the restaurant industry, and even some of the positives it led to. That's all coming up right after this.
Central Market is really into food. Like when we say cheese, it's in 12 languages into food. Butchers, bakers, and sushi roll makers into food. We're talking so obsessive about quality you can shop blindfolded into food. Central Market is really into food. If you are too, then let us turn your shopping list into a treasure map. Get inspired, get adventurous, or just get a chef-made dinner when you've got more taste buds than time. No place makes every meal more amazing like Central Market. Really into food. Shop now at centralmarket.com.
For the latest food and restaurant news in Dallas-Fort Worth, visit dallasnews.com/food. If you're behind on episodes, make sure to follow Eat, Drink, DFW wherever you get your podcasts. If you have questions for the food team or a need for restaurant ideas, we want to help. So email us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com. I am joined by our food writers, Sarah Blaskovich and Imelda Garcia. Today marks the 5-year anniversary of when Texas Governor Greg Abbott declared a state of emergency, forcing businesses to close. Offices were empty, restaurants were locked, and there was no toilet paper. It was an absolutely wild time just to be alive, and was even more of a wild time for food. So we're going to start with Sarah, who has found some really interesting data around the state of the restaurant industry today, 5 years later.
That's right. Last time we studied these numbers, we learned 1 year into COVID that 18% of the restaurants in Dallas-Fort Worth closed between March 2020 and March 2021. This was a large and sad number. It was actually a smaller number than projected. Now, we look back not only on that first year, but on the past 5 years since COVID shutdowns. And I'll say I expected in that data to see a dip in the number of restaurants in the first year or two. What I found instead was a shock. The number of restaurants in DFW starting in 2020 steadily increased every year with no dips at all. That means that even as 18% of our restaurants closed, enough new restaurants opened to add several hundred new ones every year consistently.
That's absolutely bonkers, because I think it went against every single projection that we thought we would see.
Yes, and I'm glad to hear you say that, Anna, because it did surprise me. And I ran this by a whole bunch of restaurateurs. Most of them were surprised, especially if you take a nationwide look at COVID 5 years later. Big cities like New York and LA cannot boast these numbers like Dallas did. Now, if you're only focusing your lens on Dallas, we sure did see a lot of innovation and change in the last 5 years. I would argue that food has gotten significantly better in the last 5 years in Dallas, despite COVID, which is interesting.
Sarah, what do you think? Why the numbers go up?
That's the million-dollar question. And of course, there are a bunch of steps to take us there. I'll give you some, but probably not all. Texas was pro-business in general. Governor Abbott handled COVID differently than some other governors did. And we won't get too much into the politics, but what that meant is that it opened the door for people to do business in our state where they couldn't do business in other states. So business owners moved here. It's not just about restaurants. Think of all the major corporations that relocated to North Texas or to the Austin area in the past 5 years. With those businesses come workers. People could live for less in Dallas than they could in LA or New York. Also, real estate for those business owners was more affordable. So if we're thinking specifically about restaurants, getting a lease for, 5,000 square feet in Dallas is more affordable than it would be in LA or New York. So out-of-towners did business in Dallas when they couldn't do business elsewhere. And that led to an increase in the number of restaurants, even as so many places we loved closed.
So Sarah, your story delves into 3 types of restaurateurs who did business in DFW in the last 5 years. Can you explain those?
Yes, and let me be very clear that I made these 3 types of restaurateurs up based on the trends that I found.
These aren't technical terms, Sarah.
They're not technical terms, but they're alliterations, so I hope everybody's ready for that. The first obvious one is the innovative outsider. So these are people who chose to do business in Dallas but hadn't been here before. And one of the key sources for this was Philip Franklin Lee. He is a California restaurateur. Some of his restaurants have won Michelin stars, and he became known for the pop-up, the kind of quirky little bitty place. Well, right after COVID hit, he relocated his family to Austin. So while he still has restaurants all over the country, he's a Texas guy now, and he owns 12 restaurants in Texas since COVID started.
That's a wild number.
That's a whole bunch of restaurants. Now, none of those restaurants have more than 10 seats. So he makes the argument that you can open a restaurant, even a fancy one. And in fact, he owns an omakase restaurant in a hotel room at the Adolphus Hotel in downtown Dallas. He didn't have to build that restaurant. He didn't even really have to outfit it much. His father-in-law built the bar from butcher blocks and installed it in what would have been like where the king-size bed goes in this hotel room suite. So these are the kind of restaurants he's opening. That's why I call him the innovative outsider. The second restaurant he owns in DFW is NADC Burger, which we've talked about on this podcast, but it is a little bitty burger joint inside of a comedy club. He didn't put the comedy club up. I don't even think he put the chairs and tables near the kitchen. I just think he hired people to put one item on the menu. There's one burger on that menu, and it feels like a secret, and people are lining up in Fort Worth to do it. So he's, of course, not the only outsider. We saw a lot more traditional restaurateurs come to Dallas, Fort Worth. Delilah, the Supper Club, is opening in Dallas. Catch opened in Dallas. Carbone opened in Dallas. You'll see high-end restaurants like that too. But I like Philip Franklin Lee because he shows how you can open a restaurant in ways we didn't think possible.
He 100% is also a textbook of some person that we saw during the pandemic, where we've talked about these businesses moving here now, but people just moved here in droves because it was more affordable. It wasn't just, the food workers and things like that. We have to also then be able to feed all of those people. And so you're going to be able to have room for more of these restaurants moving forward, like his, that are kind of special and quirky, but also just more of those big chain ones who'd never had a location in Texas before.
Yes. And Anna, I like your point about the population increases, because we also have seen population increases in DFW over these past 5 years. And an economist from the Bureau of Labor Statistics made a point to me: when you have more people, you have to feed them. Because I asked her, are you surprised that the number of restaurants increased? And she said, well, no, because we have more people here. And those people eat 3 meals a day. And, we're not all eating in restaurants 3 times a day, but those graphs make sense that if the number of people here is going up, the number of restaurants should go up. And in fact, if it doesn't, then we might have some sort of economic crisis. Okay, so we've talked about the first type of restaurateur, the innovative outsider. The second is the influential insider.
Opposite day.
The influential insider is a perfect example of that, is Duro Hospitality. They own 5 high-end restaurants in DFW. They opened 4 during COVID. So the bulk of their businesses were born and bred during COVID. Now, unlike the innovative outsider, the guy who opens these tiny pop-up shops, Duro Hospitality, which owns the Chumley House and Mr. Charles and The Charles, El Carlos Elegante and Sister, they are still doing fine dining. And if you read any of the food stories in the past 5 years, national publications were saying fine dining is dead. We're never going to eat fancy food again. We're not going to get all dressed up to do it. And we don't need these servers wearing the uniform, coursing out their menus. That was wrong, at least in Dallas. Duro Hospitality is proving that people do want to spend big bucks on a high-end evening. And in fact, they've done it 4 times in the last 5 years. It's incredible.
I think if something like that was also going to work, it had to be in Dallas. I feel like Dallas really leans into getting dressed up and doing something else, because when you're moving to a place like North Texas, you have bigger kitchens, you have more room to cook. So you want to go to an experience that you can't necessarily do at home. So I feel like that's why we gravitate towards high end and dives. Like those middling restaurants don't really do a ton for us.
And I think a lot of people also come from the outside. So they are like discovering the city, so to speak. So they dove into the fancy ones and the street stands. So it's great for everyone, I think.
Yes, agree. One of my favorite things that Chaz Martin, who's one of the owners of Duro Hospitality, that he said is, quote, smart business people grow through downturns. You grow when no one is looking. And that's like exactly what they did.
Buying the dip.
Yeah. And there's so much that goes into that, right? They have to know investors who will give them money in a time when poor people got poorer and rich people got richer. And they probably know some of these richer people who are willing to put their money into restaurants. So there's a lot that goes into growing during a downturn, and it probably doesn't work for everybody. I don't want to think that anyone to think that we're thumbing our nose at the restaurants that did close while these places thrived. Unfortunately, both of those things can be true.
Okay, tell us about the third.
The third is the stubborn survivor. So this is the restaurateur who either died and came back to life, or shouldered their way through and it was ugly.
This is a lot more flattering than the term zombie.
Thank you. Also, was there an adjective that started with a Z that could go before zombie? Stubborn survivor worked while the other didn't.
Zany zombies, not as kind.
It's right. But a perfect example of the stubborn survivor is the owner of Crossroads Diner. This is a breakfast place. It's not expensive, and it lived until late 2020. So the owner, Tom Fleming, wanted to keep serving people breakfast during COVID. He would say he's trying to do it safely, which is also really important. But they just didn't make enough money. It wasn't working. And there are a host of reasons why restaurants closed. Ingredient prices, lack of foot traffic, no breaks on rent during the hardest times when no sales were coming in. There's so many variables here. But Crossroads Diner couldn't make it. It closed 5 days shy of its 10th anniversary, which is like a dagger to the heart for a small business owner.
Yeah, that really is.
So Tom went off and did other stuff. I checked on him a few years in and he was making furniture. But then in the last year, he said, you know, what I'm really supposed to be here for in this world is for making breakfast for people. That's what makes him happy. And I think he makes a lot of other people happy doing it. So he reopened Crossroads Diner in January 2025. And if you ask him, he wanted to open it quicker, but you know, construction delays and sort of difficulties of running a restaurant in this climate are all too real. Also, it should be noted, he opened a breakfast place in January 2025. Horrible time for eggs. I mean, the timing was... He was already having a tough time, and then here comes the egg thing. But he is the stubborn survivor. He says, what I'm put on this earth to do is make breakfast for people, so gosh darn, I'm going to do it. And we needed all three types. We needed the out-of-towners, whether you like them or not. We needed the insiders who feel like a little bit more authentic versions of what quote-unquote Dallas food might be. And then you need those stubborn survivors selling affordable food, but who might have had the hardest time eking out a living in the last 5 years.
You can read Sarah's story on this topic by visiting dallasnews.com/food. It comes with a lot more data, some really great graphics with it. So we're excited to share that with you. Imelda, you also have your own COVID story, and it is a very different one than this. Can you tell us a little bit more about Hugo's?
Yeah, sure. This is the story of Hugo Miranda. He is an immigrant. He's a restaurateur, and he was very sick of COVID since late 2020, and he was in the hospital for almost 6 months.
Oh, no.
2 of which were in a coma, and the other 3 were in rehabilitation.
Oh, my God. Wait, Imelda, he was in a coma for 2 months.
Yes, it's amazing. I mean, he survived, and he's a whole new man now. So he was the owner of Hugo's Invitados. I don't know, do you remember that place?
I do.
It's in Las Colinas. And during his time in the hospital, he was intubated. He contracted 2 pneumonias. He was feeding from a tube that was connected to his stomach. He was about to get disconnected.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah, and he was near death 3 or 4 times. His wife and 2 kids were outside the hospital praying every evening. And then more family and more people from their church joined them. And then sometimes there were like 30 or 40 people praying outside the Methodist Hospital in Richardson.
And Imelda, they were outside because they couldn't go inside?
They couldn't go inside. That's correct. So he was so sick that, imagine this, when he woke up, he didn't recognize his family. He was that bad. So when he was out of danger, he spent another 3 months in another hospital in rehabilitation. So Hugo went back to work 5 months after being released from the hospital. He told me that he was so depressed. He had to learn how to walk again, how to eat, even how to talk, because he was intubated, so he didn't speak. In his mind, he wanted to go to work and be active, he told me, but his body didn't respond. He told me, and I quote, "My partners are money people. They are not restaurant people, and they tried to manage the business as they could, and they made some decisions. I don't blame them. Everything happened to me because what happened to me. One day I burst, and I told them to keep the restaurant, and I went to do my own thing." So finally, he decided to leave the restaurant, which still has his name on it. So now it's Hugo's Invitados, but without Hugo.
It's interesting because I think so many food people would actually relate to this kind of conflict too with their financial partners when they're like trying to run something like a business, and it's like restaurants are not solely that. It has more than one type of identity. Yes, the numbers need to work. That being said, this person that is the creative mind behind it really helps it survive and do well.
Yeah. So it took him almost 4 years to feel like himself again, he told me. And now he's the assistant general manager at Lombardi Family, specifically in Marisol.
I like that restaurant.
And yeah, and he also started a business called Tacos Caita. It's a catering business in a taqueria that serves through DoorDash and Uber Eats. They have a ghost kitchen here in downtown. So he resuscitated, so to speak.
That's incredible. I mean, to go through all of that and then come out and not be involved in the restaurant with your name on it just sounds like a kicking you when you're down kind of thing.
Yeah, and they are sad about it, but the family told me that they are happy because they are together, they are alive, they don't have any regrets, and they are trying to build a future again.
I was almost moved to tears, Imelda, when you talked about them standing outside that hospital room. I remember seeing pictures and video on the news of people praying for a family member through a window. You know, I have friends who had grandmothers in nursing homes that they could see but not touch. I had blocked that memory.
Yeah, it was a really bad time for them. And you know what? This guy started as a busboy 21 years ago. So he has been in restaurants all his life.
Telling these 5-year stories just made me want to say again that I'm so thankful for the people who worked in the restaurant industry. We called, nurses and doctors, first responders, kind of frontline COVID people, but restaurant workers absolutely were. And I hope we never lost sight of how important that was in the last 5 years.
You can find stories on all these topics and much more from our food team when you visit dallasnews.com/food. We're going to take a short break and we'll take a look at some of the changes wrought by COVID when we're back.
Central Market is really into food, like fish flown in so fresh it still has jet lag into food. Our sourdough starter has been around since grunge was a thing into food. We're talking more prime cuts than a greatest hits album into food. Central Market is really into food. If you are too, then we're the HQ for you. Whether you're a make every recipe in the cookbook foodie or a my favorite recipe is reheat type who just digs the delectable, no place makes every day more delicious like Central Market. Really into food. Shop now at centralmarket.com.
Welcome back. In just a minute, we're going to talk about how booze to go seems here to stay. But first, we'd love it if you would help us spread the word about our podcast. If you like it, please tell your friends or anyone you think would appreciate all the important information we share each week. It would mean the world to us. So we put a list together of all the things that happened because of the pandemic in the restaurant industry. Some of those are still here and some of them are gone. Some of the ones we came up with were X's on the floor that were 6 feet apart.
Some are still there.
Yeah, I think that's just laziness. I'm just kidding. Plexiglass windows, hand sanitizer just being everywhere.
Everywhere.
And like liquor people making hand sanitizer.
Yep.
Yeah. And I was like, we actually just want the tequila. QR code menus, masks at the door everywhere you went. We thought a good one that is actually seemingly here to stay is alcohol to go. This was something that was sent out as a lifeline from the state, essentially, because restaurants were like, okay, we're allowed to open and bars weren't quite allowed to. It was just strange too, because restaurants typically rely a lot on booze sales, and then they couldn't really sell alcohol out their front door when people were doing to-go food. So it was really cutting into margins. So this was purely a lifeline.
I was proud of Texas for this move because we have the weirdest alcohol laws, some of which date back to the beginning of time and have never been amended. We used to have a beer reporter here at the Dallas Morning News, and I feel like we would play a game daily of do you believe this is really one of our laws? And there's some wacky stuff. And so I would have thought that Texas wasn't the state that would allow alcohol to go. It just didn't seem, like it was something that would be important to us. And it changed the game for so many restaurants who were otherwise not making great money.
We kind of needed the cocktails, right? Because we needed the alcohol.
Yeah, it was right on time too, Imelda. Yeah. Isn't that what we were all doing at home anyway?
Yeah.
We were all drinking. I don't know about y'all, but I realized I like other people's margaritas better than the ones we make at my house. And I like other people's dirty martinis better than the ones we make at my house. And we will pay the extra money for it because it was helping a restaurant and, becoming the thing we did every night after work.
And this was also where a lot of sober, curious people came in.
A great point. There came a time when many of us, myself included, thought, are we drinking a lot?
And we got to buy them by the gallon.
Oh my God, margaritas by the gallon. I wonder if that's one of those things that our kids are going to laugh about. They'd be like, remember when someone would deliver a gallon of margaritas and it would have that frosty, it would be a milk jug.
Uh-huh.
And then you'd open the door and all by its lonesome would be a gallon of margaritas.
Some restaurants did do this very well.
They did. Mi Cocina is a perfect example. And interestingly, Dallas-born Mi Cocina did not do delivery. And yet still, it had pretty good years. One of the reasons was because of alcohol to go. So people who love Mi Cocina, if you have one in your neighborhood and it's the kind of place you like to go every Friday night, what they were experiencing is people would still come, pick up their food, take it home. So they'd eat those tacos and drink those margaritas at home and pretend like they were halfway having, the regular Friday night. I've talked to the CEO of Mi Cocina about this, and the alcohol to go is a game changer. A second example of a COVID innovator was Rita's and Queso. Does anybody remember this basically fake company that started delivering margaritas and queso only?
The only thing I remember about it is it wasn't a Mexican food or Tex-Mex restaurant doing it, right?
That's exactly right. It was Julian Barsati's company, and they famously own Nona and several other restaurants. And now they also have Odele, which is a Tex-Mex place at Lovers in Inwood in Dallas. But Ritas and queso was just those two things. And he thought, well, what do people want? When they're stuck at home, they're worried, they're sad, they're hungry, they're thirsty. Maybe margaritas and queso are like a little bit of an antidote. And you paid a premium for both of them. This was the most expensive queso I'd ever purchased and had put on my doorstep. And I would do it again.
Emotional support cheese.
And margaritas.
Yes. And then we all went, I need to stop drinking margaritas. Don't get me wrong, we haven't stopped drinking margaritas, but we're being a little more thoughtful.
Well, Imelda, I must know, did you become an expert at making margaritas during the pandemic?
Actually, yeah, I tried to make new cocktails, in that, alcohol was necessary.
Did you cook any food?
Yeah. Actually, you know what? The tortilla place near my home closed because of COVID. And then I had to learn how to make tortillas by myself.
Ooh, that's hard.
Yeah, it was hard, and they were not like a circle. They were like an amorphous thing, but it was okay. I mean, I burned my fingers, and it was like, it really made me appreciate my grandmother. That made him like really easy. Yeah.
Yeah, I love those stories of the grandma who makes tortillas every single morning. Similarly, I was listening to a podcast and Ava Longoria makes tortillas every morning for her son, like the actress from Desperate Housewives and a bunch of other things. And I'm just like, what a gift.
Yeah,
to
it
have
is a
someone
gift.
downstairs making homemade tortillas when you wake up in the morning. My gosh.
Yeah, true. Also, I started to make pies, like apple pie and cherry pies and
Well, you're a Thanksgiving enthusiast because your birthday's right there too.
yeah. But the thing was, there was no flour, remember? In the
I do.
supermarket.
It
was a nightmare, yeah.
Well, and there was no flour because everybody was making bad bread.
Yeah, like me.
I did start making bad bread. That being said, I also shipped in flour from Italy.
Oh, wow.
That was the place that I could find it. I wanted double O flour, which is a very popular pasta making flour, but I also got bread flour from there, which I still have to this day, along with way too much yeast. I should not be making bread.
Do you make good bread?
Yeah, people say it tastes good.
We started making focaccia. Remember the focaccia craze? And honestly, we would make anything that the internet was making at the time. We had a baby at home who was born the second week of the pandemic, and we had a 4-year-old, and everyone was a little bit out of sorts. The kids weren't in school and everything just felt upside down. We couldn't really go to the park at the beginning like we thought we wanted to. And so we cooked with our older daughter quite a bit. And she was 4 though, so it's kind of that unhelpful cooking thing. And we baked a lot, but then we also made focaccia. And I'll never forget, when the focaccia dough is in the pan and the bubbles rise and you like stick your fingers in it like claws in order to get the little indentations in the focaccia. Man, my 4-year-old loved that.
But she was really good at it too.
We also made some homemade ricotta and then put the ricotta on the focaccia. And then we were like, we are Italian and we should open a restaurant.
Of course.
I spent an undue amount of time at the Hudson House in Lakewood because I could walk home, but it also used to have a much better happy hour than it does now. It's still decent. It was 50% off of all of the martinis and its Bellini, which is leaded. It has a Grand Marnier floater in it. The burger also used to be half off. The oysters were also half off. And so it would just be one of those things where I'd like start working at 6 a.m. and then by 4 I could just walk over there, meet friends, walk masked to a booth to take off a mask.
Yeah, right.
I was like, that's definitely doing something right. My favorite thing about that Hudson House is that it used to be an IHOP, and that it was.
Yeah, you can still feel it a little bit.
I can feel in my bones where the bathroom is because that's where it would be in an IHOP.
Yeah, that's right. Now, did y'all get into any non-food COVID hobbies? Like, I went through a bit of a calligraphy phase.
I had a hell of a garden that was destroyed in the 2021 freeze.
Oh,
and
shoot.
I've given up all hope on gardening since then. I was like eating all my own vegetables. I had a tomato plant that lasted through December of that year, of December 2020. And then that freeze hit in January 2021. And it was devastating.
For me, it was puzzles. I mean, we made a lot of puzzles, and these made it, so to speak. Yeah.
No, the puzzles are fun, right? Because like you do it, and then like a month later, you're like, you want to do that again? But I'm not going to remember how to do it.
Yeah, that
I
was
think
me.
it just really reminds all of us about how fleeting time is.
Yeah, the last 5 years might have been 500.
Yeah.
Or they might have been a couple weeks.
It's really tough. I was like, it's been the blink of an eye, and it has been an eternity since then.
Yes.
And it was just a roller coaster in journalism as much as it was in food.
Yeah, well said.
We also have a little bit of an in memoriam that we've put together with restaurant closures that happened during the pandemic. Sarah, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, I'll mention Trinity Hall in Dallas's Mockingbird Station. It was a place my best friend's family, who is super Irish, they used to go all the time, like long before we could drink, and it will be missed.
I will say Trompo because it's sad that all the effort for many years finished in a closure of the restaurant. Even if it didn't happen during the pandemic, I think it all started in the pandemic.
I'm going to go with a curveball. Highland Park Cafeteria, which was very beloved and was no longer in Highland Park. It was in Lakewood at Casa Linda. And this is because, as everybody knows, I deeply love Luby's, but Highland Park Cafeteria was up there too.
You could have also put Luby's on your list because a bunch of those closed during the pandemic.
Sad.
I know, I'm sorry to say it. I'll finish with one. Ranchman's Ponder Steakhouse, way up in North Texas, is another that closed during the pandemic. This place is so wacky. Cindy Crawford, Stevie Nicks, Bobby Flay, and Meatloaf had all eaten there, not together. And it had been open since 1948, closed during the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, I have heard there's a chance there could be a new buyer. So we'll end on a potentially mysterious high note.
Did Meatloaf eat meatloaf?
I don't know. He didn't invite me. Can you believe that?
It's rude. You can find our story on COVID closures by visiting dallasnews.com/food. And just a quick note, we're so grateful you keep coming back to our podcast. And remember, we're here for you. We'd love to know what you guys want to talk about or hear about. So email us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com. That's all the time we have for this week. Special thanks to our producer, Julie Fisk. For the news, I'm Anna Butler. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Eat, Drink, DFW from the Dallas Morning News is made possible by Central Market.